Hello and okay, now that was the time. Hello and welcome to the JavaScript SEO office hours today, May 12th, 2021. I'm really happy to see so many new names and faces here in the live recording and a bunch of really good questions on the YouTube thread for these. Let's start with a question asked by Paulina Kogan, a question about dynamic rendering and cloaking. Say that there is a single-page application e-commerce website with certain restrictions that wants to implement dynamic rendering. Would it be considered cloaking if it has a single meta description for all products in the source that is served to the users, but individual meta descriptions per product served to Googlebot? If it was the title, this is something visible to users, so serving different content to users, and Google would be clear-cut cloaking. But I wonder if the situation is different if we are talking about meta descriptions. In general, I would say none of that is terrible enough or like misleading enough to be considered a clear-cut cloaking. I would advise against it because it is easier to not have a setup to just do that if you have to have a dynamic rendering setup for some other reason. And that's just an implementation detail. I wouldn't worry too much about it. But in general, I think it's better to serve the same meta information, and that's titles and meta descriptions, both to bots and users. That being said, I don't think that qualifies as cloaking in this case. Then we have a question from Philip Martinez. We implemented pagination using JavaScript to make a page appear as though it's loading more content from the same page when it's actually loading content from a different page. The question is if there's any difference between having the href URL be absolute or relative, so like /topic page equals 2, or if it's okay to have the href just be the query where the href would be !, page equals 2. It will function the same for the user with any of those options, but I was wanting to know if there are any potential crawling issues from implementing it one way or the other. I think it doesn't make a difference to us. I think in general, it would probably be nicer to not just have / page equals 2, just because then we know that this is related to the specific subpage, but it doesn't really matter that much, I think, in the end. That's an implementation detail that we'll have to deal with one way or the other, especially because in both cases, it's a query parameter. So the crawling-related issues that can arise from parameters like infinite crawl spaces apply here just as well. W ebenso or web benzo, I'm not sure.
Oh, that's me.
Oh, that's you. Okay, so how do you pronounce that username?
Oh, it'd be Webenzo.
Webenzo. Okay, Webenzo. Because ebenso is actually a German word, and I'm like, interesting. But yeah, Webenzo. Okay.
Yeah, it stands for El Nino Southern Oscillation, which brings great ski seasons.
Wow. Okay. Now I learned something from the office hours. That's awesome. Webenzo. Okay, so that's what was El Nino Southern?
El Nino Southern Oscillation. It just brings variety of weather to California.
Wow.
It's the El Nino. Yeah. So I have a blog that's under that name, and that just happens to be how I was logged in when I posted the question. My name is awesome. Kathy.
Hi, Kathy. So Kathy, you have a question. Working with a software vendor using a client-side JavaScript framework, we're seeing many cases on 2 separate instances of the software of pages canonicalized by Google to unrelated pages, or even to a soft 404 page. If you turn JavaScript off, no content shows. Testing the page in mobile-friendly test tools shows the page renders. However, in many cases, the Google Search Console URL inspector is showing a blank page. What's the reason for the discrepancy between mobile-friendly test and URL inspector? Can we assume that the URL inspector is timing out, and this is why the erroneous canonicals and low indexation of the site happens? It's a really good question. And the answer is not as easy, especially without knowing the URLs that are affected here. But basically, canonicalization happens at multiple stages in the pipeline. And normally, when we can render a page, it's fine and it doesn't impact canonicalization. For some reason, sometimes it can be that, especially if renders are failing for whatever reason, that we are actually seeing no content and then concluding, oh, so this page has no content, similar to this other unrelated page that also has no content, and then canonicalizing correctly. So you are on the right track, I think, with your hypothesis. The thing is that what I was wondering is, if you look at the URL inspection tool, are you seeing the page failing to render in the live test or in the crawled page?
I'm always doing the live test.
Right.
So to be honest, I'd have to go back and look and see at this. I didn't think we got a screenshot. Maybe this is me being silly, but I didn't know if we could see the screenshot in the crawl test. Can we?
I think you don't have a. Oh, now you're asking questions. I don't think you have a screenshot. I think you have the rendered HTML though. So the rendered.
Oh, I could search it. Yeah. Okay. I have not done that test, to be honest.
No, that's perfectly fine. That's exactly why we're here, right? We're working on this together, so this is fine. No, that's what I would look for, because I have a feeling that the live test, similar to mobile-friendly tests, they are using the same kind of infrastructure, but they can give you different outcomes depending on the relatively strict. Oh, you actually do have it. No, you don't have a screenshot in the crawl page. I just double checked, but you don't. You have the rendered HTML though. The live tests have relatively short deadlines to fetch resources, so it's very easily happening, or very often happening, that we are actually running out of time to wait for resources to complete. On the crawled page, I would have a very careful look at both the rendered HTML, if the content is actually there in when we actually rendered it with the production infrastructure. Good morning. And the other thing that I would look into is, when you view the crawled page, you also have under, I think it's more info, you have resources, and then look for resources that didn't load. If there's any critical client-side JavaScript or any API calls that haven't been loaded for whatever reason, those might also be the reason why we are not seeing the content. And if that happens in the production indexing run, then yes, we will see an empty page, and then these weird canonicalization errors happen. Specifically, as you say, like it happens with Soft 404 pages, I have a feeling that that might be happening here. In general, client-side rendering is not a problem, but in instances like this, it can be a problem. And then you might want to consider either dynamic rendering, or even better, server-side rendering things, depending on your stack.
Yeah, we've started the dynamic rendering conversation. One more piece of info I just want to share with you is, under settings, when you go and look at the Googlebot type, 59% is page load resources rather than smartphone or desktop. So I think that's telling me that it's trying very hard to load these resources.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that's the interpretation to take from that. So that was just one more piece of information I wanted to share.
Yeah. And that's not necessarily like a bad thing, especially with client-side JavaScript applications. The resource loads are relatively often the majority of the crawls. So that's
okay.
That's not per se a problem. It's just like, it tells you we are trying really hard. It doesn't seem to be working that well. What's happening here? And that's a good place to start digging, I think, and trying to find out, like, why are we not loading this? Sometimes you can improve things by having different caching directives, or trying a CDN to balance things out a little bit. But normally it should not be a problem. It's rarely a problem, but I have seen cases where resource load didn't go through in time, and then as we couldn't fetch the resource in time, we actually didn't see any content. That's the big downside of client-side rendering.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And for one of the sites I'm looking at, it's actually pretty slow. The time to first byte is kind of all over the map. It kind of ranges from a second to almost 8. And I've kind of kept pushing on the client to say this needs to be fixed. So I'm suspecting that's adding to the problems.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Time to first byte of 8 seconds.
Well, that's not always true, but I have seen it.
Yeah. That's something that you can definitely look into and try to find out where that that variety comes from, that deviation from the mean comes from, and then probably that's where the issue starts, but not necessarily. But it's a good venue to investigate, I think, because that's a high time to first byte.
Yes, absolutely.
Okie doke. Sweet. Then
thank you.
You're very much welcome. Then that concludes the YouTube part of the questions. So again, you have the opportunity to ask questions live. You can use the raise hand feature, or you can use the chat here in the Hangout to ask your questions live, should you have any. Or actually, hold on. We have a Q&A feature, I see. That's fascinating. But someone raised their hand. So, hold on. That is gone now. I think Naren was raising their hand.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hi, Naren.
Yeah. Hi, Martin. Yeah. So, Martin, I actually have a question. So, I basically work for a website which is into React.js. And so my question is how important it is to basically ensure that whenever we try to fetch a page through console of React.js, two things I want to ask. One is about the blocked resources, and second thing is about if we are trying to search for the content which we are trying to send for the Google, if we are not able to find it in the live fetch, and if we are not able to find it in the crawled page, what are the problems that gonna be there in these two cases? So my question are two, and my second question had two parts. Yeah.
Okay. So if I understood correctly, you're building a client-side rendered React app.
Right.
Right. And you have seen some blocked resources. What do you mean by blocked resources? Just resources not loading, or something blocked by robots.txt, or no index, or?
So it's both the cases. It's basically blocked resources through robots, and it's also a case where basically the bot is not able to read those scripts which are into JSON or maybe into all these things. Yeah.
Okay. So the thing is, basically, as Google, or your page goes through multiple stages before it is potentially findable in search, right? The first thing is crawling. Crawling doesn't really matter that much for React applications, because when we crawl, we basically, with the client-side rendered application, only get an HTML that has some placeholder content and actually loads the JavaScripts. The second stage that happens is the rendering stage, where we actually fetch these JavaScripts and run these JavaScripts in fundamentally a Chrome instance on our infrastructure. And then your application should be able to run and generate all the content that is on the site or on the page that you want to have indexed there. And then that basically the DOM gets snapshotted, and then that is used for indexing. Now, if you are blocking resources that are relevant in order to actually render the page, such as the JavaScript files or any API calls that we need to make in the renderer, then that means that it goes through the crawling infrastructure, so it follows robots.txt. So if you block, let's say, like your app or main.js file from robots.txt, we can't fetch it and we can't render your page, which means we will never see the content. That usually manifests in the live test and the crawl page not showing the content that you would expect. And I think that's exactly what you described, right? You said, like, you go into the crawl page and you can't see the content there in the rendered page, right?
Right, Martin.
That's probably because you're blocking the robot from some critical resources that we need to actually render the page. That's likely what's happening there. And generally speaking, I would expect the live test to show you which resources were blocked, and then you can use that information to unblock them and then basically try again. You should see the content that you expect in the live test, and then later on also you should see it in the crawled page rendered source.
Yeah, Martin. Cool. And Martin, I just want to ask you one more
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yes.
Is there any tool or maybe a way out to test things before going live of
Yes, absolutely.
React.js?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not exactly meant for that purpose, but it's a great tool for exactly that purpose. You can use the mobile-friendly test. The mobile-friendly test uses the same infrastructure as the live test, as the rich results test, and or you can use the rich results test. That works as well. But I prefer the mobile-friendly test because it also gives you access to the resources that were blocked, as well as the as a over the fold screenshot, as well as the rendered page source. And you can feed that with any URL. You can be like using local tunnel or ngrok if you want to do that from your developer's machine, or if you have a staging, you can use the staging URL. Any URL goes.
Thanks, Martin.
You're welcome, Naren. Thank you very much for the question. And I've seen that Music Mink has asked a question in the chat. Does same button text cause duplicate content or spammy anchor text issue? For instance, read more, check profile, etc. It's not a silly question, not really a JavaScript question either, but in general, it's not duplicate content. It's more a bad anchor text. So we don't really know the relation, and we might weigh that anchor lower. So descriptive anchor text or descriptive button text is always a good idea. Yeah, anyone else raising their hands? Because I figured out how raising their hands is now signaled in the roster here in Hangouts again. No raised hands. Oh yes, there is a raised hand. Baruch.
Hi, Martin. How are you?
Hi, great. How are you doing?
Good. It's been a while. I haven't seen you in a while.
It's been a while. That's true.
I have a quick question. So the specific site I'm dealing with has two things. One of them is a private virtual server. It's got a plugin called WP Rocket, and then at the same time, it's synced also with Cloudflare. But the issue is over there is I'm not sure what's happening. I think it's a cache between the actual site and the server. I'm getting a very high LCP that shouldn't be happening. And with the new page experience introduced that you guys introduced, I'm getting a very high response. It's been really frustrating, but I did manage to do what needs to be done, and it's been already a week, and it's been 95 of 100. Like, who cares? But at the same time, yesterday's reply was, LCP is high again, and it's so frustrating because and normally everything usually is fine. Like, I never get frustrated with this kind of stuff, but I've really done exactly what Google wants, but then I did it above and beyond in terms of results. And then yesterday's page experience.
So you're getting that in the page experience report in Search Console.
Yes.
Or where do you get the high value?
I got it in the LCP section. Let me just double check.
But in Search Console, in the page experience report, not like PSI or Lighthouse or something, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Lighthouse. I always, I refresh. Like, I refresh it twice, and then I get the exact results. Refresh it once, and then I get like points down. Yeah, I know it's not correct. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Like the thing is, like, I wanted to know where it's coming from, because I know that, as far as I'm aware, the page experience report is probably still a little flaky these days. LCP is a tricky metric, similar to CLS being a tricky metric. Let's not talk about FID because that's the trickiest of the three. LCP is a heuristic to begin with. Like, we need to work out what we think is the most important piece of content, and like, what is the largest content paint that happens there. and this can be a little flaky sometimes. And then it gets aggravated by the fact that the page experience report is an aggregate report from multiple data sources. And yeah, so if you are sure that you will be doing fine, and you are, because you are measuring with other tools and you're getting good, consistent data, and you have a setup that sounds solid and seems to be working fine, then I would take these reports in the page experience report section a little with a grain of salt and say like, yeah, I should probably look into it in terms of what does the Chrome user experience report say here, if that backs up the problem that we are seeing here. But if you are sure that you are doing fine, it should work itself out with the improvements that are happening to the page experience report.
And what about the Core Web Vitals? Because over there, again, and measuring it with another software over there, it's like a dream come true. And they're also measuring it through Lighthouse, so I don't pay attention to that.
Yeah, exactly. The big problem is like you have to be aware that there are field data and lab data situations. Chrome usability or UX report and Search Console's page experience report, they are taking field data, whereas Lighthouse, PSI, and any tools that are using Lighthouse or HTTP, what's it called, web page test, all of these are not using field data. They are using lab data. So lab data usually looks better than the field data looks like. But yeah, it's tricky is the answer to this one, unfortunately.
Is there a reason why Lighthouse doesn't like Rocket Loader from Cloudflare? Is there a reason why there's like, I'm noticing, so when I turn it on, right, when it's turned on, then I get a reply in, it basically, you know, it's not agreeing with Rocket Loader for some reason.
I'm guessing the problem is probably because you're injecting. I'm not exactly sure how Rocket Loader works with Cloudflare. I've used it in the past, but that's like 10 years ago. Well, 10 years is no, it's probably more like 7 years ago. But anyway, long time ago. But the thing is, it injects additional JavaScript, and JavaScript usually, JavaScript usually comes with a bit of a performance hit and a performance cost. So I'm guessing that maybe it delays some of the events that we're looking for, and thus actually creating a penalty, because there's nothing in Lighthouse that says like, oh, this is using Rocket Loader, let's remove some of the points or something like that. There's nothing inherent. It just basically measures certain events happening on the page. If these events take longer to happen, that's usually not a good thing.
And what is the exact number today, based on your number? What should a site in terms of mobile, should it be below 2.5 seconds?
Oh God, I know that we have some numbers published somewhere.
They're not really recent, but it's below 3.
The faster the better is my general hunch there. Like, obviously you can't make it ridiculously fast if you have a certain setup, especially those who are on larger platforms. Yeah, you'll deal with that. But as far as I'm aware, the thresholds for, we're talking LCP, right?
Yes.
Yeah, then the threshold is still 2.5 seconds. I have not heard any adjustment to that. Maybe at I/O there will be new thresholds, but I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you so much, Martin. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Trying to help. Kathy, right? Kathy has raised her hand as well.
Yes. So I thank you for your tip to go look at the crawled page. Unfortunately, these URLs are all showing up under things like duplicate, so they're not in the index, or soft 404. So there's no crawled page to take a look at.
Okay.
And I mean, I can go try the mobile friendly test again, but in general, the mobile friendly test works for these pages.
Yeah, that's a weird one then. Why are we not seeing this in? Did you make larger, or were there any larger changes to any of the code, like any of the JavaScript? Is there like a rollout of a new version or something that happened recently?
Okay. So for one site, so I've seen this on two sites, right?
Mhm.
It's the same platform.
Mm-hmm.
On the first site, they did block an essential resource using robots.txt.
Ooh.
And we fixed that, and things were indexing, and then it sort of stopped indexing, and now we're seeing this problem. On the second site, yes, there was a migration from one domain to another. They had assured me that all it was changing was the URLs, but it turns out they did make changes in the underlying JavaScript. So yes, for the second case that there was changes, and I'm just beginning to get the details on what was changed.
Right. Because the reason why I'm asking is the number one, so there's like two big differences between the live test and the actual infrastructure that we're using for indexing and rendering and crawling. Number one is obviously the fetch deadlines. Surprise, surprise, because indexing is perfectly fine to wait a couple of hours for requests to actually be made, because the crawler has to crawl pretty much the entire internet, so it can take a little while. While we obviously don't want to make you sit in front of a loading bar for the mobile-friendly test or any of the live tests for an hour, so we have a lot shorter fetch deadlines there. That's one big difference. That's also why the live tests sometimes time out when the actual real-world situation does not time out. The number two difference that I feel is at play here is that the live test obviously should test live, which is like whatever is on the server at this point in time when you hit the button to test. Whereas indexing, the actual indexing pipeline, does not. It uses a cache. So if something.javascript has fundamentally changed and has not been replaced in the cache yet, and then something else.javascript requires the change in something.javascript to be there, it might actually not have that because there's a cache mismatch. And that can lead to weird issues. But then you should see some sort of console errors. But yeah, well, in the crawl side, ha 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 ha, which you don't have because it has been coalesced before. Damn. This is one of the cases that I would take to the forum and try to get like someone's attention, either a Google representative or the what's it called, the product experts in the webmaster forum, because they can give you private support, as in like the program experts, product experts can give you a private chat basically, and then you can post a URL there. You can also send me a URL on Twitter, but via direct message, for instance, and then I can take a look. The downside is I can't give you any information back. I can take the information in and try to see if this is a general or bigger problem, and then try to like address this publicly somehow. But yeah, that's the way to go, because I don't exactly know what's happening here, and that's something that needs to be investigated a little more, and I don't exactly know how easy that's going to be with the public tools.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for at least confirming why I'm getting confused and frustrated.
I understand what's happening there. I don't understand why it's happening.
Yeah.
So
okay.
That's a question that probably depends a little bit on the platform you're using and on the specific sites that are experiencing these problems. But again, feel free to drop me a direct message with a URL so that I can take a look. And maybe I can share that publicly on Twitter, and you and others will benefit from the outcome.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Naren is raising his hand as well. Naren, what can I do for you?
Martin. Yeah. So Martin, I have a question which is also related to React, and which is a genuine question for us case like this. So Martin, my question is basically, if we write code for a certain page and we keep both the themes, that is like mobile and desktop, in the same code, and we hide some code for desktop in the
Mhm.
mobile and some code in mobile for the desktop. So
Mhm.
it's like vice versa. So if that is the case, in some of the pages of a website, is it harmful from a crawlability perspective view, because
Nope.
Google is able to see both the codes?
Yeah, that's not a problem.
That's not a problem.
That's not a problem.
Thank you, Martin.
You're very much welcome, Naren. All right. Any other questions today? Again, feel free to use the chat or raise your hand here in the Hangout. I'll also double check if someone might have posted on YouTube as well. Because sometimes people are posting on YouTube when they... No. No more questions on YouTube. No more questions in the chat. No more raised hands here. In which case, I'd like to thank you all very much for your time. It has been a huge pleasure. Okay. That's a thanks in the chat. You're welcome, Philip. Very much happy to help. All right. In that case, thank you so much. We see each other again for the next office hours and Q&A, JavaScript Q&A in 2 weeks' time. Thanks so much for all your questions. Thanks for your time. Have a fantastic day. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Bye, Matt.
Bye.